The snow had stopped falling only minutes earlier. A thin white mist hung low over the open fields, and the cold air carried the heavy rumble of engines moving slowly in the distance. It was early morning, January 1945, somewhere west of the Vistula River in Poland. The German armored column was advancing with quiet confidence. At the front of the formation rolled the massive shapes of Tiger tanks, their thick armor dark against the snow-covered ground. Inside,
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
those steel giants, experienced crews believed they still held the advantage. For years, the Tiger had ruled the battlefield. Its gun could destroy enemy armor from incredible distances. Its armor had saved countless crews from destruction. But on this morning, something was different. The men inside those Tigers did not yet know that somewhere beyond the frozen tree line, Soviet IS-2s were already waiting, and they had already lined up their first shot. The column belonged to elements of the German 16th Panzer Division, retreating slowly while trying to form a defensive line against the massive Soviet winter offensive. The Red Army had begun its push on January 12, 1945, in what would become known as the Vistula Oder Offensive. Within just days, Soviet forces had smashed through German positions and were racing west toward Germany itself. German armored units were being thrown into battle wherever they could slow the advance. And now, in this quiet frozen field near the town of Sandomierz, two of the most powerful tanks of the Second World War were about to meet. Inside one of the lead Tigers sat Oberleutnant Karl Brenner, commander of Tiger No. 221. Brenner had fought in armored battles since 1943. He had seen T-34 tanks burn, watched entire columns of Soviet vehicles destroyed by the long reach of German guns. His crew trusted the Tiger completely. Its 88mm KWK-36 cannon had a reputation across every front. If the enemy appeared first, the Tiger usually ended the fight before the opponent even knew what happened. But Brenner also knew the war had changed. Soviet tanks were improving, their numbers were overwhelming, and German fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements were disappearing fast. The column moved slowly along a narrow country road, covered in packed snow and frozen mud. Each tank kept distance from the one ahead, careful not to become easy targets for artillery or aircraft. The engines of the Tigers roared steadily, their tracks grinding through the frozen ground. Infantry from the 304th Grenadier Regiment marched beside them, wrapped in thick winter coats, rifles slung over their shoulders. Some soldiers glanced nervously at the tree line ahead. Others stared silently at the tracks of the tanks, trying to stay warm. The sky above remained gray and heavy. A weak winter sun struggled to break through the clouds. Visibility was limited, but the open farmland allowed long lines of sight. It was the kind of terrain where heavy tanks could dominate. Brenner leaned forward slightly inside the turret, his eyes fixed through the periscope. His gunner, Feldwebel Otto Weiss, sat quietly beside the massive breech of the 88mm cannon, waiting for orders. Radio chatter crackled through the headset. Another Tiger commander reported no movement ahead. A reconnaissance half-track had passed through the area earlier that morning and found nothing unusual. According to intelligence, Soviet armor had not yet reached this sector. Brenner allowed himself a moment of cautious relief. If they could reach the ridge 2 kilometers ahead, they could establish a strong defensive position. But war had a way of changing plans without warning. Far beyond the German column, hidden behind a low wooded ridge, Soviet heavy tanks waited in silence. These were IS-2 tanks from the 71st Guards, heavy tank regiment, part of the advancing Soviet 5th Guards Army. Their commanders had received orders during the night to hold this position and destroy any German armored forces attempting to escape westward. The IS-2 was a terrifying machine in its own right. Built to break German heavy armor, it carried a massive 122mm D-25T gun. The shells fired by that cannon were enormous. When they struck, they did not simply penetrate armor, they shattered it. German crews who had faced the IS-2 before described the effect as violent and sudden. Even near misses could cripple a tank. Inside one of those Soviet machines sat Guards Captain Ivan Petrov. Petrov was only 27 years old, but had already survived years of brutal fighting. His regiment had pushed across Ukraine, through Poland, and now they were closing in on Germany itself. His crew had spent the early morning watching the distant road through binoculars, waiting. At 7:18 in the morning, the observer inside the forward Soviet tank spotted movement. Dark shapes appeared slowly through the thin fog. Large shapes, heavy shapes. Petrov lifted his binoculars again. The outline was unmistakable. Tall turret, wide tracks, long barrel, Tiger tanks. The word passed quietly through the Soviet radios. Crews straightened inside their vehicles. Engines remained silent. Soviet doctrine in heavy tank units often favored the first powerful strike rather than movement. If they fired first, the German advantage in optics and range could be neutralized. Petrov knew exactly what they were facing. Tiger tanks had destroyed countless Soviet vehicles earlier in the war, but now the Red Army had learned their weaknesses. The IS-2's gun could break them. At shorter distances, even the thick frontal armor of the Tiger could fail. The Soviet tanks remained hidden behind the ridge. Their hulls were angled carefully. The gunners adjusted their sights slowly, tracking the approaching German column. Back on the road, Brenner's Tiger rolled forward steadily. Snow crunched under the heavy tracks. The long barrel of the 88mm gun pointed toward the open fields ahead. Something felt wrong. Brenner couldn't explain it. The battlefield looked too quiet. No artillery, no movement, just silence and the distant echo of engines. He raised his binoculars and scanned the ridgeline ahead. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then something moved. A dark shape shifted behind the snow-covered slope. Before Brenner could react, the silence shattered. At exactly 7:24, the first Soviet IS-2 fired. The 122mm cannon roared across the frozen field like thunder. The massive shell crossed the distance in seconds. It struck the second Tiger in the German column. The impact was devastating. The shell smashed directly into the front of the turret, tearing through the armor with explosive force. Flames burst instantly from the hatch. The Tiger stopped moving, its turret jammed sideways as smoke poured into the cold morning air. Inside Brenner's headset, the radio exploded with frantic voices. Tiger 214 had been hit. Another Soviet gun fired. The second shell slammed into the road beside a German half-track, throwing snow and metal into the air. Brenner reacted instantly. "Target ridge! Armor-piercing!" Weiss swung the heavy turret toward the ridge. The Tiger's powerful optics searched for the source of the attack. Then he saw it. The blunt shape of an IS-2 slowly rising above the ridge. Distance, 800 meters. That was well within lethal range for the Tiger's 88. Brenner gave the order. The 88mm cannon blasted a bright flash across the field. The recoil shook the entire tank. The shell raced toward the Soviet position, but the IS-2 had already moved. The round struck the earth just behind it, throwing dirt into the air. Another Soviet gun fired. This time, the shell slammed into the front armor of Tiger 221 with a brutal crash. The entire tank shuddered. Inside, sparks burst from metal surfaces. The armor held, but barely. Weiss loaded another round quickly. The Tiger's advantage was speed. The 88 could fire far faster than the Soviet 122mm gun, which required separate loading of shell and propellant. The gun fired again. This time the shell struck the side of the Soviet tank, just below the turret. The IS-2 jerked violently, but it did not explode. Instead, it reversed behind the ridge, smoke trailing from its armor. The battle had begun. Across the field, more Soviet tanks appeared. One by one, the dark shapes of IS-2 heavy tanks climbed into view along the ridge line. Their long guns pointed toward the German column. German crews realized the danger immediately. The Tigers were strong, but they were outnumbered. Brenner ordered his driver to move off the road into the open field. Staying in a column meant easy targets for Soviet gunners. Tracks bit into the snow as the Tiger turned. Behind him, another German Tiger fired, destroying a Soviet tank that had exposed too much of its hull. The IS-2 erupted in flames, its turret blown open by the powerful 88mm round. But the Soviet crews kept firing. Their guns were slower, but each shot carried enormous power. One shell struck a Tiger near the rear of the German formation. The impact ripped open the side armor, and black smoke poured out. German infantry scattered across the snow, diving for cover. The battlefield filled with thunder as both sides exchanged fire. Through the periscope, Brenner watched another IS-2 crest the ridge. Weiss fired again. This time the round struck the lower front hull. The Soviet tank stopped moving. Flames erupted from the engine deck, but even as it burned, another Soviet gun fired from behind it. The shell struck a German Tiger squarely in the turret ring. The explosion tore the turret loose from the hull. For a moment, both sides paused, shocked by the violence of the hit. The cold morning air filled with smoke, fire, and the echo of massive guns. These were no ordinary tanks fighting. These were giants. The Tiger and the IS-2 were among the most powerful armored vehicles of the entire war. Their battle here, on this frozen Polish field in January 1945, was a clash of machines built for destruction, and neither side intended to back down. Brenner wiped sweat from his forehead despite the freezing air inside the tank. The fight had only lasted minutes, but already the field was burning with wrecked vehicles. Through the smoke, he saw something that changed everything. More Soviet tanks were arriving, not just IS-2 heavy tanks. T-34s were appearing behind them. The Soviets were not just ambushing the German column, they were surrounding it. At that moment, the battle shifted from a duel between heavy tanks to a desperate fight for survival. The Soviet offensive had been moving faster than German command expected. Entire armored brigades were already pushing west. The Tigers had driven straight into the path of a much larger force. Brenner knew the danger immediately. T-34 tanks might not have the armor of the Tiger or the IS-2, but they were fast and numerous. Once they moved around the flanks, they could attack from multiple directions. Even a Tiger could be destroyed if its side armor was exposed. The German radios filled with urgent commands. One company commander ordered his tanks to form a defensive line facing the ridge. Another reported enemy armor approaching from the east. German infantry scrambled into ditches and behind farm walls, preparing their Panzerfaust weapons. Across the battlefield, Captain Petrov saw the same situation developing. His IS-2 regiment had stopped the German advance, but now lighter Soviet units were moving in to finish the job. T-34 tanks from the 31st Tank Corps were racing across the snowy fields behind the ridge. Petrov gave a short order to his driver. The IS-2 climbed higher onto the ridgeline, exposing more of its turret. The gunner adjusted the heavy cannon slowly. Through the sight, he could see the German Tigers spreading out in the open field. One Tiger fired again, destroying another Soviet vehicle. The power of the 88mm gun was still terrifying. Petrov understood the danger. A Tiger could destroy several tanks before being knocked out if given time and distance. He leaned toward the radio. The order was simple. Focus fire. Moments later, two IS-2 tanks fired almost together. The twin blasts rolled across the battlefield like thunder. One shell struck the front of a German Tiger. The armor held, but the shock forced the tank backward into the snow. The second shell hit the ground beside another Tiger, sending a wave of dirt and frozen earth into the air. The German crew lost sight of their target for a moment. That moment was enough. A third Soviet gun fired. The shell slammed into the side of the German tank. The Tiger erupted into flames. Inside Brenner's turret, the air was thick with smoke and tension. He could hear the explosions across the field and the constant crack of radio reports. "Enemy armor east! More tanks moving south!" The battlefield was closing around them. Brenner gave a quick command to his driver. The Tiger moved forward toward a small rise in the field. From there, the gunner could see further across the battlefield. Weiss spotted a T-34 moving quickly across the snow. One shot from the 88 destroyed it instantly. Another T-34 appeared, then another. But the numbers kept growing. The Soviet advance was relentless. Even as Brenner's crew fired again and again, Soviet tanks kept moving forward through the smoke and wreckage. Behind them, the burning remains of Tigers and IS-2s marked where the giants had already fallen. The battle near Sandomierz lasted less than an hour, but in that short time, the frozen field became a graveyard of armored steel. By mid-morning, the remaining German tanks were forced to withdraw westward. Some Tigers managed to escape. Others were abandoned after running out of fuel or suffering damage. Soviet forces continued their advance without stopping. The road toward the Oder River was now open. For the German crews who survived that morning, the battle was another reminder of how much the war had changed. Once, the Tiger had dominated the battlefield. Now, even the most powerful German tank could be overwhelmed by numbers, coordination, and the growing strength of Soviet armor. And on that cold January morning in 1945, when the first IS-2 fired across the frozen field, the confident advance of the Tigers had turned into a desperate fight against the unstoppable momentum of the Red Army.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.